So when my best friend, Lily, suggested I try online dating again, I was understandably hesitant. "Come on, Sarah," she said, scrolling through her phone as if she were deciding my fate. "It's not 1998. Everyone meets online now. My cousin met her husband on some app where you swipe pictures of dogs. You're overdue for a win." "Lily," I replied, sipping my wine. "My last date tried to sell me essential oils halfway through dinner. I'm not ready to go back out there." But Lily wasn't having it. She downloaded an app onto my phone while I wasn't looking and handed it back to me with a satisfied smirk. "Just try it. Worst case, it's a disaster, and I get to hear a hilarious story." Foreshadowing? Maybe. I'll admit, I wasn't taking it that seriously. I swiped on a few profiles here and there, but nothing really caught my eye. Most people either looked too perfect, like, I clearly photoshopped myself into a yacht perfect, or too terrifying, like, I have a collection of porcelain dolls, and they're all named Bernice Terrifying. Then I saw his profile. His name was Jake, and he had an easy, scruffy charm about him. His bio said he loved trivia nights, bad movies, and hiking, which felt like a safe trifecta. Even better, his pictures didn't look overly polished or stolen from a stock photo website. He just looked like a normal guy holding a coffee cup and grinning awkwardly next to a dog that wasn't even his. We matched, and the conversation was surprisingly fun. He was funny in a sarcastic way that matched my own sense of humor, and he didn't take himself too seriously. Within a few days, I was laughing at my phone like an idiot and forgetting all about my essential oil peddling past. Then he suggested we meet in person. "Let's do something different," Jake said in one of his messages. "Not just drinks or dinner. How do you feel about weekend trips? I know this little cottage upstate. It's cozy, and the stars are incredible." Okay, pause. I know what you're thinking. "Sarah, are you seriously considering going to a secluded cottage with a man you've never met? Have you never watched a single horror movie in your life?" And yes, those thoughts did cross my mind. But Jake was charming. He made me laugh. He sent me a picture of his cat wearing a bow tie. He just didn't seem like the kind of guy who'd hack me to death in the woods. Besides, the idea of a little getaway sounded appealing. Work had been stressful, and the thought of escaping the city for a couple of days was tempting. Plus, Jake promised it'd be super casual, just a chill weekend, no pressure. So against my better judgment, I said yes. The drive up to the cottage was fine. Jake picked me up in his Subaru. Of course he drove a Subaru. And we spent the first hour chatting about everything from our favorite childhood snacks to the best Nicolas Cage movies. Honestly, it felt like a road trip with an old friend. But as we got closer to the cottage, things started to feel off. For one, the GPS stopped working about 20 minutes before we arrived. Jake laughed it off, saying, classic upstate dead zones, but I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. Then there was the cottage itself. Calling it a cottage felt generous. It was more like a shack that had seen better days, probably during the Great Depression. The paint was peeling, the windows were cloudy, and the front porch had a noticeable lean to it. "Cozy, right?" Jake said, grinning as he grabbed our bags. I forced a smile. "Sure. Cozy." Inside, the place smelled faintly of mildew and something I couldn't quite place, like burnt rubber. Jake didn't seem to notice. He gave me a quick tour, which consisted of a tiny kitchen, a living room with mismatched furniture, and a bedroom with a bed that looked like it might collapse under the weight of a single pillow. "Sorry it's not much," Jake said, scratching the back of his neck. "I kinda inherited it from my uncle. Haven't had much time to fix it up." "It's fine," I lied, because what else was I supposed to say? "It's charming." Jake smiled, clearly relieved. "Great. I'll grab some firewood for the stove. Make yourself at home." As soon as he stepped outside, I called Lily. "Girl, are you alive?" She answered on the first ring. "Barely," I whispered, glancing out the window to make sure Jake was still outside. "This place is straight out of a murder documentary. If I go missing, tell the cops to start here." "Wait, are you serious?" Lily asked, her voice suddenly serious. "No," I said quickly, trying to laugh it off. "I mean, yeah, it's a little creepy, but Jake seems nice. I'm just being paranoid." "Uh-huh," Lily said, clearly unconvinced. "Well, if he starts sharpening an axe, you run, okay?" "Deal." The first night was fine. Jake cooked dinner, spaghetti because of course, and we spent the evening playing card games and drinking cheap wine. It was actually kind of fun, in a weird, rustic way. But then things started to get weird. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the bedroom window. At first, I thought it was Jake, but when I peeked out, I didn't see anyone. just the dark outline of the trees and the faint glimmer of stars. "Jake!" I whispered, but he didn't stir. I told myself it was probably just an animal and went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there. The next morning, I mentioned it to Jake. "Probably a raccoon," he said, shrugging as he sipped his coffee. "They're everywhere up here." "Yeah, probably," I said, but I wasn't convinced. Then there was the basement. I hadn't even noticed the door at first. It was tucked away behind the kitchen, partially hidden by a stack of boxes. But when I went to grab a glass of water, I saw it. "Hey!" I called out to Jake, who was fiddling with the wood stove. "What's in the basement?" He froze for half a second before laughing nervously. "Oh, nothing. Just old junk. The place came with a ton of my uncle's stuff, and I haven't gone through it yet." His tone was casual, but something about the way he avoided looking at me made my stomach twist. That night, I heard the footsteps again, and this time they didn't stay outside. I woke up to the sound of creaking floorboards, like someone was walking through the living room. My heart started pounding as I strained to listen. "Jake!" I whispered, but he didn't respond. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it toward the bedroom door. It was closed just as we'd left it. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. Then the doorknob started to turn. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The door creaked open just an inch, and I swear I saw a shadow move in the hallway. "Jake!" I hissed, shaking him awake. He groaned and rolled over. "What?" "There's someone in the house," I whispered, gripping his arm. Jake sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I pointed at the door, which was now wide open. I heard footsteps. The door opened on its own. Jake grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the hallway. "Nothing. See," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "There's no one here." But I wasn't convinced. The next day, I told Jake I wasn't feeling well and needed to head back home. He seemed disappointed but didn't argue, which was a relief. As we drove back to the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just barely escaped something terrible. Then, just as we were pulling into my neighborhood, Jake turned to me and said, "You know, I had a great time this weekend. We should do it again sometime." I forced a smile. "Yeah, maybe." But in my head, I was already planning to block his number the second I got out of the car. And I did. I haven't heard from Jake since, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Lily, of course, thinks the whole thing is hilarious. "You wanted a story," she said, nearly crying with laughter when I told her what happened. "And you got one." "Yeah, thanks, Lily. Next time, I'm sticking to drinks and dinner." It started a few months ago when I decided to try online dating. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to talk to, maybe go out with. You know, the usual. Work had been exhausting, and most of my friends had either moved away or settled down. I figured it couldn't hurt to swipe through a few profiles and see what happened. The app was one of the more popular ones. You know the type. Swipe right if you're interested, swipe left if you're not. It was mindless entertainment at first, browsing through profiles when I was bored. Then I came across his profile. His name was Ryan. He wasn't conventionally attractive, but something about his smile seemed genuine. His bio wasn't anything special, just a few lines about loving hiking and horror movies, but it was enough to catch my attention. He seemed normal, and honestly, that's all I was looking for. I swiped right. We matched almost immediately. The conversation started off casual. He asked about my favorite movies, and we bonded over our mutual love for obscure horror films. He told me about his dog, a golden retriever named Max, and shared some funny stories about him. I told him about my job and my love for photography. It felt easy, natural. After a week or so of chatting, Ryan suggested we meet up. He offered to take me to a small, family-owned coffee shop downtown. It sounded perfect, low pressure, public, and cozy. I agreed, and we set a date for that Saturday afternoon. When Saturday came, I spent way too long getting ready, second-guessing everything from my outfit to my hair. I was nervous but excited. I texted Ryan as I headed out, letting him know I was on my way. He replied instantly with a thumbs-up emoji. The coffee shop was quaint and quiet, just as Ryan had described. I got there a little early and grabbed a table near the window. I ordered a latte to calm my nerves and waited, and waited, and waited. Ryan never showed up. At first, I thought maybe he was running late. I checked my phone, but there were no new messages. I sent him a quick text. "Hey, are you on your way?" Nothing. By the time an hour had passed, I realized I'd been stood up. Frustrated and embarrassed, I left the coffee shop and went home. That night, I debated whether or not to message Ryan again. Part of me wanted an explanation, but another part of me didn't want to seem desperate. Eventually, I decided to just let it go. If he didn't respect my time, he wasn't worth it. But then at 2:13 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ryan. "Sorry I couldn't make it today. Something came up. Can we try again?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Something about the timing felt off. Who apologizes for standing someone up in the middle of the night? Still, I convinced myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he'd had an emergency. Maybe he worked late and forgot the time. I replied the next morning, telling him I'd think about giving him another chance. He seemed genuinely apologetic and promised to make it up to me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to reschedule. This time, Ryan suggested dinner at a local Italian restaurant. It was a nicer place than I expected, but I figured it was his way of making up for standing me up. We set the date for the following Friday. When the day arrived, I was cautiously optimistic. I got to the restaurant a few minutes early and waited by the entrance. The hostess asked if I wanted to be seated, but I told her I was waiting for someone. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Ryan stood me up again. I was furious. I texted him, "Are you serious? If you didn't want to meet, you could have just said so." This time, he replied almost immediately, "I'm here. I've been watching you." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around the restaurant, looking for anyone who could be him. The dining area was full, but no one was looking at me. The only people near the entrance were a couple waiting for their table and the hostess. I texted back, "What are you talking about? Where are you?" His response came seconds later. "You look beautiful tonight." My stomach dropped. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my heart racing. I didn't stop until I was in my car with the doors locked. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? That someone stood me up and sent a creepy text? When I got home, I blocked Ryan's number and deleted the app. I told myself it was over, that I'd never hear from him again. But I was wrong. The messages started a week later, this time from an unknown number. "Did you block me? I just want to talk. You can't ignore me forever." I didn't respond. Then the photos started coming. The first one was of me at the coffee shop, sitting by the window, staring at my phone. The second one was of me leaving the Italian restaurant, looking over my shoulder. The third one was of me in my car, parked in my driveway. I called the police that night. They took a report and told me they'd do what they could, but since I didn't know Ryan's last name or have any concrete information about him, there wasn't much they could do. I started staying with a friend, too scared to be alone in my own house. I didn't feel safe anywhere. Every time I saw someone with a phone, I wondered if they were taking a picture of me. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, I wondered if it was him. Then, 2 weeks ago, I got one final message. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to get to know you. Goodbye." The messages stopped after that. I moved to a new apartment and changed my number. I've deleted every social media account I had. I don't go out alone anymore, and I haven't even thought about dating since. But sometimes late at night, I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching me. I'll hear a creak in the hallway or see a shadow move across the window, and my heart will start racing. And every now and then, I'll get this thought in the back of my mind. What if Ryan's still out there? What if he's not done watching? I was bored, scrolling through one of those dating apps where you swipe left or right. You know the one. At this point, I wasn't even looking for anything serious. I was just swiping out of habit. Left, left, right, left. You get it. It's like a game you play when you're alone on your couch with bad TV on in the background. And then he popped up. His name was Dean. He looked normal. Like nice normal. He had this messy dark hair, a kind smile, and this one photo of him holding a coffee mug while sitting on a porch. There was something so casual about him, like he wasn't trying too hard. His bio was short and sweet. Writer. Dog dad. Lover of rainy days and bad jokes. I mean, not bad, right? He seemed low-key, and after a long series of Jim Brothers and dudes posing with fish, low-key sounded amazing. So I swiped right, and boom, instant match. Okay, at first, everything seemed great. He messaged me right away, which is always a good sign. None of that weird game-playing nonsense. He asked me about my favorite books. We joked about how neither of us could survive a zombie apocalypse. And he even sent me this horrible pun about skeletons that made me laugh way harder than it should have. He was funny, but not in a try-hard way. He seemed sweet. After a couple of days of chatting, Dean asked if I wanted to meet up. Normally, I'd be cautious about meeting someone so quickly, but he had this way of making me feel comfortable, like we'd already known each other forever. He suggested this little coffee shop downtown that I'd actually been to before, so I figured why not? It was public, it was daytime, and honestly I was kind of excited to meet him. So, the day comes, and I get there a little early, like 10 minutes or so. I grab a table near the window, order a latte, and wait. I'm scrolling on my phone, trying not to look like I'm desperately scanning the door every 5 seconds, when I get a text from him. Hey, running just a little late. Be there in 10. Smiley face. No big deal, right? Traffic happens. I sip my latte and keep waiting. 10 minutes turns into 15, then 20. I text him just a quick, hey, everything okay? No response. By now, I'm starting to feel the dreaded, I got stood up vibe. I'm about to finish my drink and leave when my phone buzzes. It's Dean. Sorry about that. I'm here, but I can't find you. Where are you sitting? I text back, by the window wearing a green sweater. A minute later, my phone buzzes again. Got it. Don't move. Smiley face. Okay, cool. He's here. I keep looking toward the door, expecting him to walk in any second. But 5 minutes go by. Then 10. And he still doesn't show. At this point, I'm annoyed. I text him again. Are you coming in or? And then I get this reply. I see you. You look beautiful. Okay, now my annoyance is turning into something else. That uneasy, gut-level feeling when something just doesn't add up. I glance around the coffee shop, but no one is looking at me. The only other people there are a couple sitting by the counter and an older guy reading a newspaper. No one who looks like Dean. I text back, where are you? I don't see you. This time, his reply comes instantly, don't worry. I'll come to you. At this point, I'm officially creeped out. I grab my bag, ready to leave when my phone buzzes again. It's another text from Dean. If you leave, I'll follow you. My stomach drops. I glance around the coffee shop again, my heart pounding in my chest. No one is looking at me. No one seems out of place. But that text, it's like he's watching me right now. I don't reply. I just get up and walk out as calmly as I can, trying not to look panicked. The street outside is busy, full of people going about their day. I blend into the crowd, walking quickly but not running, until I get to my car. I get in, lock the doors, and sit there for a second, trying to calm myself down. Then my phone buzzes again. Why did you leave? Smiley face. I block his number immediately. I delete the app. I tell myself it's over, that he was probably just some weirdo messing with me. But as I'm driving home, I can't shake the feeling that someone is following me. Every car behind me feels suspicious. Every person I pass on the street feels like they're looking at me too long. By the time I get home, I'm so paranoid I double-check all the locks on my doors and windows. That night, I can't sleep. I keep checking my phone, half expecting another message, even though I blocked him. I check the front door 3 more times before finally forcing myself to go to bed. The next morning, there's a knock at my door. I freeze. It's early, like 7 a.m., and I'm not expecting anyone. I peek through the peephole, but no one's there. Still, something doesn't feel right. I wait a few minutes before opening the door, just a crack. Sitting on the welcome mat is a single coffee cup. There's no note, no name, just the cup. My stomach turns. I don't touch it. I close the door, lock it again, and call my friend Emily. Am I crazy? I ask her after explaining everything. This can't be him, right? He doesn't know where I live. You deleted the app, right? Emily asks. He can't contact you? Yeah, but what if he found me some other way? My social media? My number? Can you stay at my place for a few days? She asks. Just to be safe. I pack a bag and head to Emily's that afternoon. I don't see anyone following me, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time my phone buzzes, I flinch. For the next week, nothing happens. No texts, no knocks at the door, no weird coffee cups. I start to convince myself that it's over, that I overreacted. Maybe it wasn't even Dean who left the cup. Maybe it was just some random prank or a mistake. I go back to my apartment, trying to get back to normal. But then, a few nights later, I wake up to a sound outside my window. It's faint, like someone tapping on the glass. My apartment is on the 2nd floor, so it shouldn't be possible, but when I sit up and look, I swear I see a shadow move just out of sight. I don't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I call my landlord and ask if I can break my lease. I don't care about the penalty. I just want out. I moved 2 weeks later. I changed my number, deleted all my social media, and haven't been on a dating app since. I don't know who Dean really was, or if that was even his real name. All I know is that every time I see someone holding a coffee cup, my stomach twists. So yeah, I guess you could say I'm done with online dating. Forever. It was a Saturday evening, and I was on my way to meet her for our first date. She was a pretty blonde, the kind of person who turned heads without even trying. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and nerves, my palms slightly sweaty as I gripped the steering wheel. I wanted everything to go well. No, I needed everything to go well. First impressions, after all, are everything. We'd agreed to meet at this cozy little Italian place downtown. It wasn't too fancy, but it had a reputation for great food and an even better atmosphere. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She was even prettier than I remembered, with her blonde hair catching the light and her blue eyes sparkling like she was already having fun. I tried to play it cool as I approached the table. "Hey," I said, probably a little too casually. "You've got a great spot here." She smiled again, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. "I figured the view would give us something to talk about if things got awkward," she joked, gesturing to the street outside. I laughed, grateful that she'd broken the ice. "Well, let's hope we don't need it." We ordered our meals, and the conversation flowed easily. She was funny, sharp, and quick with a comeback, exactly the kind of person I could see myself getting along with. As the evening went on, we started talking about family. That's when she mentioned she had a twin sister. "Wow, a twin," I said, genuinely intrigued. "What's that like?" She grinned. "It's great. We've always been close. It's like having a built-in best friend who knows all your secrets, and occasionally uses them against you." I laughed, imagining the kind of antics twins could get into. "So, are you identical?" I asked. "Yep," she said. "She looks just like me, poor thing." I chuckled at her self-deprecating humor, enjoying how comfortable she seemed in her own skin. For a moment, I thought about how cool it would be to meet her twin sister someday. But then I pushed the thought aside, reminding myself to focus on the present. After all, I was here with her, not her sister. The conversation drifted to other topics for a while, but then it circled back to birthdays. It seemed like a natural transition, given the family talk. "When's your birthday?" I asked, genuinely curious. "April 15th, she replied without hesitation. "Nice," I said. Then, without thinking, without even pausing to engage my brain, I asked, "So when's your twin sister's birthday?" The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd said something incredibly stupid. There was this split second where time seemed to freeze, and I could almost hear my own inner voice screaming, "What did you just say?" She stopped mid-bite, her fork hovering in the air. Slowly, she looked up at me, her blue eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she set her fork down and gave me a look. One of those looks that says, "Are you serious right now?" "Same day as mine, dummy," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "She's my twin sister." I felt my face flush with heat, and I was pretty sure I was the color of the marinara sauce on my plate. I stammered, trying to backpedal. I don't know why I asked that. Of course, that makes sense. She burst out laughing, cutting me off mid-sentence. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a quiet giggle. It was a full-blown, can't-catch-her-breath kind of laugh. I sat there, stunned, watching her shoulders shake as she covered her mouth with her hand. I wasn't sure whether to laugh along with her or crawl under the table. When she finally calmed down, she wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and said, "That's got to be the dumbest question anyone's ever asked me." I laughed nervously, still trying to salvage my dignity. "Well, at least I'm memorable, right?" "Definitely memorable," she said, her lips twitching with suppressed laughter. "Don't worry, I won't hold it against you." Much. The rest of the date went surprisingly well, considering my embarrassing faux pas. In fact, the mood seemed lighter after that, like the awkwardness had been replaced with a shared inside joke. She teased me about it a few more times throughout the evening, and I took it in stride, grateful that she had a sense of humor about the whole thing. When the check came, I insisted on paying, partly because I wanted to make a good impression, and partly because I felt like I owed her after my ridiculous question. She didn't argue, but as we walked out of the restaurant, she smirked and said, "You know, if this date doesn't work out, my twin sister's single." I groaned, but I couldn't help laughing. "I think I've embarrassed myself enough for one night. I'll stick with you, thanks." She smiled, and I could see the warmth in her eyes, The kind of smile that makes you feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Good choice, she said. That night, as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Sure, I'd made a fool of myself, but she'd laughed it off in a way that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the end of the world. Maybe I'd even done something right, despite my blunder. We kept seeing each other after that, and every once in a while, she'd bring up the twin birthday question just to watch me squirm. It became one of those stories we told friends and family, always met with laughter and a few good-natured jabs at my expense. I didn't mind, though. It was worth it. Fast forward 24 years, and here we are, married, with 2 kids and a house full of memories. The story of our first date is still one of her favorites to tell, and every time she does, she looks at me with that same amused glint in her eye. "Can you believe I married this guy?" she'll say, shaking her head as she recounts the story for the 100th time. And every time, I laugh right along with her, grateful for that moment of shared laughter all those years ago. Because in the end, it wasn't about the question or the embarrassment. It was about how she made me feel, how she turned an awkward moment into something we could laugh about together. It was about the way she looked at me that night, like she saw something worth sticking around for, even if I wasn't perfect. And if I've learned anything in the last 24 years, it's this. Sometimes love doesn't come from getting everything right. Sometimes it comes from getting things spectacularly wrong, and finding someone who'll laugh with you anyway. Dating in your 30s is like shopping in the clearance aisle. You know there's probably a reason everything's left over, but you're desperate enough to give it a shot anyway. That's how I ended up on a date with Owen, a guy who seemed charming enough on the app but turned out to be, well, let's just say I'm still not sure if he was a serial killer or just really, really weird. It all started when I matched with him on Bumble. Owen had this whole mysterious intellectual vibe going on in his profile. His pictures were broody but artsy, leaning against a brick wall, reading a thick book with no visible title, staring pensively into the distance like he was auditioning to be the next Batman. His bio said he loved classic literature, true crime documentaries, and long walks in the moonlight. Sure, it was a little dramatic, but hey, at least it wasn't another guy posing with a base he caught last summer. We started chatting, and Owen's messages were intense. Like, instead of asking me what my favorite pizza topping was, he sent me a quote from Edgar Allan Poe. I wasn't sure if he was flirting or preparing me for my AP English exam, but weirdly I kind of liked it. I thought, hey, maybe he's just a little eccentric. At least he's not boring. After a few days of back and forth, he asked me out for drinks. "Let's meet at this little bar I know," he wrote. "It's quiet, intimate, and perfect for meaningful conversation." That sounded way better than one of those loud chain restaurants where you have to yell over the sound of a blender. So I said yes. The bar Owen picked was not what I expected. When he said quiet and intimate, I assumed candles and soft jazz, not dimly lit and one step above a haunted basement. The sign outside just said Barb in flickering neon, and the door creaked ominously when I pushed it open. I half expected to see a guy in the corner playing a violin as a storm raged outside. Owen was already there, sitting at a booth in the back. He looked exactly like his photos, dark hair, sharp jawline, and that "I brewed for fun" expression. He stood up when he saw me and smiled, which actually made him seem a little less like he was planning my murder. "Hey, you made it," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. "I hope the place isn't too atmospheric." Atmospheric? The vibe screamed urban legend waiting to happen, but I didn't want to be rude, so I laughed and said, No, it's cozy." The waitress came over, and Owen ordered a whiskey neat. Of course he did. I asked for a gin and tonic, because I needed something light to calm the nerves that were already fluttering in my stomach. The waitress gave me a look that seemed to say, "Are you sure you want to be here?" But maybe I was imagining that. Probably. "So," Owen said, leaning forward with his hands folded on the table, "tell me about yourself. What's your darkest fear?" I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He just stared at me, waiting for an answer. "A clown's, I guess?" I finally said, trying to keep it light. Or, I don't know, accidentally sending an email to the wrong person at work. He nodded like I'd just revealed a deep, philosophical truth. "Interesting. Fear of embarrassment. A fear of being misunderstood. It says a lot about you." "Does it?" I asked, sipping my drink. He didn't answer. Instead, he launched into a story about how he once spent a summer in Romania researching folklore. "The locals told me about this one legend," he said, his voice low and dramatic. "A spirit that haunts the forest, luring people in with whispers and never letting them leave. I nodded politely, but inside I was thinking, okay, so we're skipping the small talk about favorite TV shows and going straight to ghost stories. Cool, cool. The night went on like that, Owen telling creepy stories, me nervously laughing and wondering if I'd accidentally agreed to a date with Wednesday Addams' long-lost cousin. To his credit, he was a great storyteller. His voice was smooth, and he had this way of making every detail sound vivid and eerie. But it was also a lot. Like, I came here to talk about hobbies and maybe bond over a mutual hatred of pineapple on pizza, not plot twists involving cursed mirrors. Then, about halfway through the date, things got even weirder. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, partly because I needed a moment to breathe, and partly because I wanted to text my friend Gina and let her know I wasn't dead yet. The bathroom, of course, was down a narrow, poorly lit hallway that smelled faintly of wet wood and regret. Typical. As I was washing my hands, I heard footsteps outside the door. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth. My first thought was that it was Owen, but why would he be lurking outside the bathroom? Okay, considering how the night was going, it wasn't that crazy of a thought. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I walked back to the table, trying to shake off the weird feeling creeping up my spine. Owen was sitting exactly where I'd left him, staring down at his drink like he was contemplating the meaning of life. He looked up when I sat down and smiled. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just long line." For a while, things went back to normal, or as normal as they could be with a guy who casually drops phrases like the inevitability of death into conversation. But then he started asking me these strange questions. If you could erase one memory, what would it be? Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you were alone? Do you believe in past lives? At one point, he leaned in and said, "Do you ever feel like you're not dreaming, but someone else is dreaming you?" I swear to God, I almost choked on my gin and tonic. By the end of the night, I was exhausted. Not because the date was physically demanding, but because keeping up with Owen's deep, existential horror vibes was mentally draining. When the check came, he insisted on paying, which was nice, but then he said, "You can get the next one." "The next one? The next one?" I managed to mumble something polite like, "Yeah, sure," but inside I was already planning my escape. I thanked him for the drinks, gave him an awkward side hug, and practically ran to my car. When I got home, I collapsed on the couch and immediately called Gina. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Well, I'm alive," I said. "So that's something." I told her everything, how the guy was basically a walking haunted house, how the bar felt like it was cursed, and how he kept asking questions that made me question my entire existence. "So you're not seeing him again?" she asked. "Gina," I said, "if I see him again, it'll be in the reflection of a cursed mirror." We both laughed, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Owen wasn't done with me. And sure enough, a week later, he texted me. "Had a great time the other night. Want to grab dinner? Maybe somewhere darker?" I blocked his number immediately. It was a warm summer night. We were 15, and we were in love. No, wait, scratch that. We were 15 and wanted to grind crotches. That's the one. I was over at my friend's place chilling out. He was playing Diablo 2, and I was on the other computer chatting on MSN, when lo and behold, she logged on. After some small talk, I mentioned I was in town at Joe's, pseudonym, place, and she said I should come over to her house. We had talked beforehand about sex and fooling around, made out a bit, and we both wanted to screw, but parents etc. kept getting in the way. I told Joe that I was going to go and try to get laid, and he was understandably supportive. And with that, I was off into the night. It was midnight or shortly after, cloudy but hot out, and the orange glow from the city lit up the night remarkably well. As I walked and pondered the possible events to come, I was accompanied by the distant yet booming sound of thunder. I really should have noticed the smell of rain in the air. I made quick work of the several blocks between us and came to her house, going to her bedroom window as was previously directed. Knock knock, she came to the window with a finger to her lips, wearing a black bra and pink underwear, and pointed down. My eyes followed her gesture to the still form of her young brother, lying on her bedroom floor. She preempted my curiosity with, "He gets afraid of thunderstorms, so he is going to sleep in here tonight." To which I asked with more of a look of disappointment and confusion than words, "But I wanted to plow you, all romantic-like." Her smile told me I was still in business. I crawled into her window, took off my shoes and left them on her bedroom floor, and we stepped out of her room and made our way to her basement. The lights were out, as we did not want to wake her religious parents, but she knew her way around, and led me past a table to her couch. After a few minutes of pathetic teenager make-out and pawing, things got serious, and I was awarded my first blowjob. It goes without saying that it was fantastic, as I have only had one bad BJ in my entire life. Horror story for another day, perhaps. And after a while I returned the favor to her. After the foreplay, we moved on to the sex. Being the responsible young adult that I was, I had brought 2 condoms, and being the retarded young adults that we were, she advised I wear them both for extra protection, and I did. Cue worst sex ever. But I'm fairly sure it did happen. In the throes of passion, we were totally unaware that the distant rumbling of thunder had become the storm of the year directly above our town, and the rain and thunder eventually tore our attention away. Wait a minute. That doesn't sound like rain. That sounds like footsteps. To this day, I have yet to see anyone do anything faster than that Christian girl get dressed. She was dressed and tugging at my arm before I had my pants fully done up. So I grabbed my shirt and my socks, and she dragged me up the stairs and across the common room. Well, mostly across. About halfway down, the telltale flicker of flashlights descends the stairs. Turns out the power had been knocked out by the storm. Not having enough time to get to her room without being seen, she shoved me into the bathroom beside us, and went to address her parents as I climbed into the shower stall and cowered. Outside I heard them conversing. Her parents, having no suspicions, were quite calm, just asking how her and her brother were doing. Fine. Okay, well then we're going to go back to bed, try and get some sleep. Phew, I'm in the clear. Her dad utters a phrase I won't soon forget. I am just going to use the bathroom before we go, and steps into my hiding place. Placing the flashlight on the bathroom counter, beam up, I see the silhouette of a large man walk over to within 3 feet of me and take a piss. I'm fairly sure my heart stopped beating, just to make sure he couldn't detect me at all. He finishes, wastes his one flush. Come on, people. When the power is out, follow the mantra. If it's brown, flush it down. If it's yellow, let it mellow. And departs. Parents leave. She comes and gets me. We both shit bricks. And then we continue into her room, so I can GTFO ASAP. I get fully dressed, and am sitting on the edge of her bed putting on my last sock when both of our eyes shoot to the bottom of her bedroom door. Flashlights. I quickly discern that I don't have the time to get out the window undetected, but spot that her bed has a fairly decent rise to it, and luckily for me, was uncluttered underneath. I drop to the floor and ninja vanish mere moments before her parents enter her room. Again, inconsequential chit-chat, and I feel like I am in the clear. I sigh a breath of relief, and let my head rest on her carpet, looking out into the room. Directly into the eyes of her 5-year-old brother lying on the floor, now wide awake, and staring into my soul. I'm done. I'm busted. I'm dead. Christian father kills horny teenager is going to be the headline in the newspaper the next day, guaranteed. A million options flash through my mind until I decide on a brilliantly simple choice. Bringing one finger up to my lips, I make the sign for silence and secrecy. Thank FSM for the playful naivety of children, because he simply smiled and returned the gesture. Her parents departed, and shortly after, so did I, to enjoy my walk home in the pouring hot summer rain, with ample time to ponder how close I came to a serious shit beating. Worth it. Netflix wasn't hitting the spot, and I had already scrolled through every social media app twice. I hit the dating app and matched with him. His name was Alex. His profile was simple, no cheesy one-liners or over-the-top gym selfies. Just a few candid photos of him hiking, sitting by a campfire, and one of him holding a dog. Not even his dog, as he admitted later, but still cute. His bio was short, outdoorsy, chill, and always up for a good conversation. He seemed normal, safe, and after so many failed first dates, normal was exactly what I was looking for. We started chatting, and it was easy from the beginning. No awkward pauses, no weird vibes. He was funny, polite, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. By the end of the night, he suggested grabbing dinner that weekend. I hesitated for a second. It felt a bit quick, but he seemed harmless. Besides, meeting in public is safe, right? It's not like I was going to his house or anything. The restaurant he suggested was a small Italian place I'd been to before. It was cozy, with dim lighting and checkered tablecloths, the kind of spot where you could linger over a glass of wine without feeling rushed. I got there a little early and grabbed a table near the back. As I waited, I texted my friend Lily to let her know where I was, just in case. She always joked I had main character energy for getting myself into weird situations, But this time, I was determined to prove her wrong. Alex showed up 10 minutes late, which didn't bother me too much. He looked just like his pictures, tall, dark hair, a little scruffy but not in a sloppy way. He smiled as he walked over, and I could feel myself relax a little. First impressions matter, and he seemed completely normal. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sitting down across from me. "Parking was a nightmare." "No worries," I said, smiling back. "I've been craving pasta all day, so you're forgiven." We laughed, and the conversation started flowing just as easily as it had online. He told me about his work as a freelance graphic designer, his recent trip to Colorado, and his goal to visit every national park in the country. I told him about my job, my disastrous attempt at growing a balcony garden, and my obsession with true crime podcasts. He even joked, "So you're the type who'd know how to get away with murder, huh?" And I laughed a little too loudly. It was nice. Easy. I started thinking that maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be another dating horror story. But then, about halfway through the meal, things started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just little things. Like how he started glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, his smile fading slightly each time. Or how, when I asked him a question about his family, he paused just a little too long before answering, like he was trying to remember what he'd told me before. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. First dates are awkward sometimes, right? Then, as we finished our pasta, he leaned forward and said, "Hey, do you want to grab a drink somewhere quieter? There's a bar down the street I think you'd like." I hesitated. The restaurant was bustling, full of people, and I liked that. A quieter place meant fewer people around, which, after listening to all those true crime podcasts, made me a little uneasy. But I didn't want to seem rude or overly cautious, so I said, "Sure, why not?" The bar he took me to was weird. Not in an obvious way. It wasn't a dive or anything. It was clean, with soft lighting and leather booths, but it was practically empty. Just a bartender cleaning glasses and a couple sitting in the corner, whispering to each other. I followed Alex to a booth in the back, feeling the unease in my chest grow. We ordered drinks, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed fine again. He asked me about my favorite movies, told me a funny story about his dog-sitting mishap, and even complimented my necklace. But something about his energy had shifted. He wasn't as relaxed as he'd been at the restaurant. His eyes kept darting around the room, like he was looking for someone, or avoiding someone. Then he asked, "So, do you live alone?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't the first time someone had asked me that on a date, but something about the way he said it, his tone, the way he leaned in slightly, made my stomach twist. No, I lied. "I have a roommate." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's smart. It's good to have someone around." I forced a smile and took a sip of my drink, my mind racing. Was I overreacting? Was he just making conversation, or was there something darker behind the question? I decided to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "So, what's your favorite national park so far?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yosemite," he said. "It's beautiful, but it can feel isolated, you know? Like you could disappear there, and no one would ever find you." My heart skipped a beat. I laughed nervously, hoping he didn't notice how tense I was. "Yeah, I guess that's true." After that, I decided to call it a night. I told Alex I had an early morning and needed to head home. He offered to walk me to my car, but I declined, insisting I'd be fine. He didn't push, but as I walked away, I could feel his eyes on me, watching me leave. When I got to my car, I locked the doors immediately and sat there for a moment, trying to shake off the weird feeling in my gut. I told myself I was being dramatic, that he was just a little socially awkward and I was reading too much into it. But as I drove home, I couldn't stop replaying the night in my head, every little moment that had felt wrong. I didn't hear from Alex for a couple of days, and I figured that was the end of it. Maybe he'd sensed my discomfort and decided not to push things further. But then one night I got a text. "Hey, I had a great time the other night. Let's do it again soon." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't want to see him again, but I also didn't want to provoke him by ghosting. So I replied, "Thanks, but I don't think we're a match. Good luck out there." A few minutes later, he replied, "Are you sure? I really liked you." I didn't respond. That's when the calls started. They always came late at night, usually around 2 or 3 a.m. I'd wake up to my phone buzzing, the caller ID showing unknown number. At first, I didn't answer, but after the third night in a row, I picked up, ready to tell whoever it was to knock it off. But when I answered, no one said anything. I could hear breathing on the other end, slow and steady, but no words. I hung up, my hands shaking, and blocked the number. The calls stopped for a while after that, and I started to relax, thinking it was over. But then, one night, I came home to find a note taped to my door. "I know you live alone." That was it. No name, no explanation. Just 6 words that made my blood run cold. I didn't sleep that night. I called the police, but there wasn't much they could do without proof of who had left the note. They suggested I stay with a friend for a few days, so I packed a bag and went to Lily's. "Come on, Emma," Jess said, sprawled across my couch with a glass of wine in one hand and her phone in the other. "You haven't been on a date in months. You're like a social hermit. What's the worst that could happen? You meet a cute guy, you get free drinks, and maybe, just maybe, you'll stop watching Dateline and convincing yourself every man is a serial killer." I rolled my eyes, but she wasn't entirely wrong. My dating life had been non-existent lately, and yeah, maybe I did watch too much true crime. But still, I wasn't that desperate to get back out there. Or at least, I thought I wasn't. Then Jess shoved her phone in my face. "Okay, what about him? He's cute, right?" I squinted at the screen. The guy's name was Matt. He had that rugged outdoorsy look, messy blonde hair, a scruffy beard, and a flannel shirt in every photo. His bio said something about hiking, dogs, and his love for adventures. He looked harmless. Normal. "Yeah, I guess," I said, shrugging. Jess sighed dramatically. "You guess? Emma, this man could be a model for Hot Lumberjack magazine. Swipe right." Now, against my better judgment, I swiped. And wouldn't you know it, we matched immediately. Matt messaged me first, which was a nice change. Most guys on these apps make you carry the conversation, but he was quick to ask questions and seemed genuinely interested. He told me about his dog, a rescue mutt named Rosie, and how he spent most weekends hiking the trails outside the city. He had this easy, laid-back vibe that made me feel comfortable. After a couple of days of chatting, he suggested we meet up. "There's this great little bar downtown," he wrote. "Chill atmosphere, good drinks. You in?" I hesitated. Meeting up so soon? It felt a little fast. But Jess was in my ear, literally sitting next to me on the couch, whispering, "Do it. Say yes. Live a little." So I said yes. The bar wasn't far from my place, just a short Uber ride downtown. It was one of those trendy spots with exposed brick, Edison bulbs, and an overpriced cocktail menu. When I got there, Matt was already waiting outside, leaning casually against the wall. He looked just like his pictures, tall, broad-shouldered, with that scruffy outdoorsy charm. "Hey, Emma," he said, flashing me a grin. "Yeah, nice to meet you," I said, trying not to sound as nervous as I felt. We went inside, grabbed a corner booth, and ordered drinks. Matt was easy to talk to, just like he'd been over text. He told me about his latest hiking trip, how Rosie had tried to chase a deer, and how he was thinking about adopting a second dog. It was nice. Normal. But then, about 20 minutes into the date, he started asking some weirdly specific questions. "So, do you live alone?" he asked, casually swirling his whiskey. I froze for half a second, but I forced a laugh. No, I live with a roommate." Total lie. Jess didn't count. She was just crashing for the weekend. Cool, cool, he said, nodding. "That's smart. You can never be too careful, right?" He smiled, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. I tried to steer the conversation to safer territory, asking about his job, his hobbies, his favorite movies. But every now and then, he'd circle back to me. "So, what's your usual routine? Like, do you work from home, or how do you usually get around the city? Uber, subway, walking? Do you ever hike alone? Or do you stick to crowded trails?" I answered vaguely, trying not to give too much away, but the unease in my chest was growing. Something about the way he asked those questions, so casual, so disarming, made my skin crawl. After about an hour, I told Matt I had to head out. I made up some excuse about an early morning meeting, and he didn't argue. If anything, he seemed almost amused. "Sure, no problem," he said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "Let me walk you to your car." "Oh, no need," I said quickly. "I'll grab an Uber." "Nah, I insist," he said, his grin widening. "It's not safe out there, you know." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Outside, the streets were quieter than I'd expected. Most of the shops were closed, and the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows. Matt walked beside me, his hands in his pockets, whistling softly. "Where's your Uber picking you up?" he asked. "Just around the corner," I lied, pulling out my phone to make it look like I was checking the app. We turned the corner, and that's when I saw it. A white van, parked halfway down the block, its engine idling. Matt's demeanor changed instantly. His easygoing smile disappeared, replaced by something colder, sharper. "This you?" he asked, gesturing toward the van. "No," I said quickly, taking a step back. "My ride's further up." He didn't move. "Emma," he said, his voice low and almost disappointed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." My heart stopped. What are you talking about?" I stammered, my voice shaking. Matt took a step closer, and I saw his hand move to his pocket. I didn't wait to find out what he was reaching for. I turned and ran. I've never run so fast in my life. My legs felt like jelly, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop. I could hear Matt's footsteps behind me, getting closer, and I knew I couldn't let him catch me. I rounded another corner and spotted a gas station up ahead, its fluorescent lights flickering like a beacon. I sprinted toward it, practically throwing myself through the door. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager, glanced up as I stumbled inside. "Help!" I gasped, clutching the counter. "There's someone, he's..." Before I could finish, the door swung open behind me. Matt stepped inside, his expression calm and composed, like nothing had happened. "Hey, Emma," he said, his voice smooth and friendly. "You left your phone back there." He held up my phone, waving it like a peace offering. The cashier looked between us, clearly confused. "Is everything okay?" he asked. I didn't even think. I grabbed the cashier's arm and said, "Call the cops." "Now." Matt's smile faltered for a split second, just long enough for me to see the anger flash in his eyes. But then he laughed, holding up his hands. "Hey, no need for that," he said, backing toward the door. "It was just a misunderstanding." And then he was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later, but by then Matt and the van were long gone. I gave them his name, his profile, everything I knew about him. But when they looked into it, they couldn't find anyone by that name. The profile was fake. The pictures were probably stolen. We'd been hanging out for ages. One of those friendships where you're not really sure when it started, but suddenly you're spending all your free time together. He was a classic nerdy guy, the kind who wore his love for gaming and sci-fi on his sleeve. And I liked that about him. We'd spent countless hours playing StarCraft, debating the finer points of strategy, and trash-talking each other in the kind of way that only good friends, or frenemies, can. Over time, I started to feel like maybe this thing between us could be something more. There were these little moments, him waiting for me after class, the way he smiled when he saw me, the way he introduced me to his hobbies like I was already part of his world. I liked him, and I thought he liked me. So when he asked if I wanted to go to a Magic, the Gathering tournament with him one Saturday, I thought, why not? I wasn't a huge Magic player, but I'd dabbled enough to know my way around a deck. And honestly, the idea of spending a whole day doing something he loved sounded fun. Plus, tournaments seemed cool in that geeky, high-energy kind of way. I was all in. We got to the game shop that morning, and I could tell he was in his element. He was chatting with the regulars, pulling out his deck like he was ready to dominate, and explaining the tournament rules to me like I hadn't already skimmed them online. It was cute. I registered, built my deck, and jumped in. What I didn't expect was to do, well, I don't know if it was beginner's luck or just a solid strategy, but I advanced through the rounds with relative ease. I could tell he was a little surprised, and maybe a little annoyed, but he didn't say anything at first. Then we got matched up against each other. I tried to play it cool, cracking a few jokes as we shuffled our decks. "Don't hold back," I said, grinning. "I'm ready." "Oh, I won't," he replied, though his tone was less playful than usual. The game started, and I could feel the tension in the air. It was one of those matches where every move felt like a chess game, and for a while it was neck and neck. But then I got lucky, pulled the right cards at the right time, and managed to edge him out for the win. I was thrilled. I didn't gloat or anything, but I couldn't help smiling as I extended my hand and said, "Good game." He didn't take it well. What started as some muttered grumbling quickly escalated into a full-blown tantrum. He slammed his cards down, accused me of being too lucky, and refused to look at me. Other players started glancing over, clearly uncomfortable. I tried to laugh it off, saying, "Hey, it's just a game," but he wasn't having it. By the time the round ended, he was sulking at a table in the corner, refusing to talk to me. When the tournament wrapped up, I walked over and asked, "Hey, are you ready to go?" "No," he snapped. "Find your own way home." I stared at him, dumbfounded. Was he seriously this mad over a card game? "You can't just leave me here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're my ride." "Not my problem," he muttered, crossing his arms like a petulant child. Thankfully, the guy behind the counter overheard the whole thing. He leaned over and said, "Come on, man. Don't be like that. Take her home." With some grumbling and eye-rolling, he finally agreed. I climbed into the passenger seat, the tension in the car so thick you could cut it with a knife. We drove in total silence, the kind of silence where even turning on the radio feels like a risky move. I was half wishing I'd called my parents to come get me instead, but at least I'd be home soon. Or so I thought. About halfway home, the speedometer started creeping up. He was clearly still fuming, and now he was taking it out on the gas pedal. I glanced at him nervously. "Hey, maybe slow down a bit," I suggested. "Why?" he snapped. "It's not like I'm doing anything wrong." I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, we saw the flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. "Great," he muttered, pulling over to the side of the road. "Just what I needed." The officer approached the driver's side window, calm and professional. "License and registration, please." That's when things took a turn from bad to worse. Instead of handing over his documents like any sane person would, Date Guy decided to argue. He started raising his voice, demanding to know why he'd been pulled over, saying it was unfair, that he wasn't speeding. He absolutely was. The officer remained polite but firm, telling him to step out of the car. At this point, I was in tears. Between the tension from the tournament, the awkward silence, and now this, I was completely overwhelmed. I just wanted to go home. The officer noticed and leaned down to talk to me. "Are you okay, miss?" he asked gently. I nodded, though I'm sure I looked anything but okay. I just want to go home." The officer sighed, clearly exasperated with Date Guy's behavior. "I'm going to call your parents to come pick you up," he said. "You don't need to be stuck here while I deal with him." I nodded again, grateful for his kindness. Meanwhile, Date Guy was pacing on the side of the road, throwing his hands up and shouting about how this was ridiculous and unfair. The officer eventually led him to the back of the squad car, where he sat glaring at me through the window like this was somehow my fault. When my parents arrived, I had to explain the entire debacle. How we'd gone to a tournament, how I'd beaten him, how he'd thrown a fit, and how this whole mess had spiraled out of control. My mom gave me a sympathetic look while my dad muttered something about boys being idiots. They drove me home, and I spent the rest of the night replaying the disaster in my head. The next day at school, I avoided him like the plague. I wasn't sure if he was embarrassed or still mad, but honestly I didn't care. I'd written him off completely. We still had a couple of classes together, but we never spoke again. Looking back, it's almost funny, almost. It's definitely a story I've told a dozen times, always with a mix of disbelief and secondhand embarrassment. Worst date of my life, no question. And all because one guy couldn't handle losing. When I was about 25, I lived on the Toronto Islands, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a little slice of paradise right across the water from the city. Life there was peaceful, quiet, and full of moments that made you stop and appreciate how unique it was, like taking the ferry every time you wanted to go into the city. Sure, it wasn't the most convenient, but it added a bit of charm to daily life. One night, I was on the ferry heading into Toronto, and as I sat down, I noticed her. A woman sitting just a few seats away from me, and let me tell you, she was absolutely, undeniably, breathtakingly beautiful. I don't mean kind of pretty or cute in a certain light. I mean the kind of beautiful that makes you question if you've accidentally wandered into a movie, or if some casting director has snuck a supermodel onto your commuter ferry. She was that beautiful. She had this effortless elegance about her, the kind that feels unattainable. You know, the kind where even if you wore the exact same outfit, you'd still look like you got lost in a thrift store. I couldn't help but glance over at her, trying not to stare but failing miserably. I was 25, single, and already imagining how this could be one of those meet-cute stories people always talked about. As the ferry pulled into the city, the skies opened up, and it started pouring rain, because apparently, the universe decided this story needed a dramatic twist. I didn't have an umbrella, but I did have my car parked nearby, so I saw my moment. I gathered up my courage, walked over to her, and said something smooth like, "Hey, it's raining. Want a ride?" To my surprise and relief, she said yes. It was a short drive to her place, but it felt like the kind of ride you remember forever. She was funny, kind, and yes, still ridiculously beautiful. When we pulled up to her apartment, I figured that was the end of it, but just as she was about to get out of the car, she turned to me and said, "Hey, do you want to go out sometime?" My brain nearly short-circuited. Sure." I said, probably sounding a little too eager, but not caring in the slightest. She smiled, thanked me for the ride, and disappeared into her building. For the next week, I replayed that interaction over and over in my head, telling myself that I'd somehow managed to impress this stunning woman enough for her to ask me out. And then, like a dream come true, she called me. She suggested we go bowling, a bit of a curveball, no pun intended. But hey, who was I to question her? Did I mention she was beautiful? The night of the date arrived, and I showed up at the bowling alley near her place, equal parts excited and nervous. And there she was, waiting for me, just as stunning as I remembered. If anything, she looked even better. I was practically floating as we made small talk, got our shoes, and picked a lane. Everything seemed great. I felt like I'd hit the jackpot, until I made the mistake of asking her, "Hey, can I grab you a drink?" Her answer was casual, but unexpected. "Oh no," she said. "My religion doesn't allow me to drink." "Okay, no problem. Not a deal breaker." "No worries," I said. "How about a soft drink?" She shook her head. "I don't eat any sugar." "Ah," I said, my enthusiasm dipping ever so slightly. "Coffee?" "No, I don't drink caffeine." I paused, mentally running through my list of potential options. "Tea?" "Nope, no tea either." At this point, I was running out of ideas. "Water?" She smiled. "Just plain water, thanks." I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. I mean, sure, she was beautiful, but the conversation was starting to feel less like a date and more like a dietary Q&A session. Still, I told myself to keep an open mind. Maybe this was just a quirky thing, and the rest of the evening would pick up. Spoiler alert, it didn't. As we bowled, I quickly learned that her strict dietary restrictions were just the tip of the iceberg. No meat, no fried foods, no late nights, no clubs, no movies with inappropriate content. I was starting to feel like I'd accidentally wandered into a lifestyle intervention rather than a date. And then came the kicker, the religion. "Hey Scott," she said, pausing between turns. "My church is a lot of fun. You should come with me on Sunday." I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Thanks, but I'm not really the church-going type." "Oh, you'd love it," she insisted, her enthusiasm ramping up. "We have great community events, and the pastor is so inspiring. I think it could really change your life." The more she talked, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a passing suggestion. It was a full-blown sales pitch. Suddenly, I wasn't just a guy on a date. I was a potential recruit. As she rattled off the church's virtues, I found myself nodding politely while mentally calculating how much longer I had to endure this. By the time the date ended, I was practically vibrating with relief. I'd spent the entire evening trying to find some common ground, but it felt like every conversation was a dead end. She didn't drink, didn't eat most foods, didn't enjoy any of the things I did, and to top it all off, she was trying to convert me. As we walked to our cars, I plastered on a polite smile and said, "Well, this was fun." "Yeah, we should do it again sometime," she said brightly. "Definitely," I lied, knowing full well that there was absolutely no chance of a second date. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted from the sheer effort of trying to make the date work. For a while, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how something that had started so promisingly could have gone so spectacularly wrong. To this day, I still think about that date every now and then, not because it was great, but because it was the perfect lesson in how appearances can be deceiving. She was, without a doubt, one of the most beautiful women I'd ever met. But sometimes, beauty isn't enough to carry a conversation, let alone a relationship. Never in my life have I been so relieved that a date was over. It's 2023, and no one meets like that anymore. No coffee shop meet cuties, no serendipitous encounters. Just swiping. Endless, mind-numbing swiping. It was a Tuesday night when I decided to give Tinder another shot. The kind of night where your fridge contains half a bottle of wine and an old takeout container that you're scared to open. I was curled up on the couch in my sweatpants, scrolling through profiles with the enthusiasm of someone filing their taxes. Left. Left. Hard left. Oh God, why do they all have fish? And then I saw him. His name was Aaron. He had a sharp jawline, messy black hair, and these piercing blue eyes that practically dared you to swipe right. His bio was short but funny, 6 feet 2 inches, because apparently that matters. Dog dad. Expert at parallel parking. Swipe right if you can handle bad puns. Bad puns? Sold. I swiped right and boom, we matched. A small, fleeting victory in the wasteland of modern dating. Aaron messaged me first, which was already a green flag. None of that staring at each other in silence nonsense that happens when neither of you wants to make the first move. His opening line was, "So, do you want to hear a construction joke? Or should I wait until it's finished?" I groaned, out loud, but I laughed too, because it was just the right level of stupid to work. We started talking, and the conversation flowed easily. He told me about his dog, a golden retriever named Max, and his love of horror movies. I told him about my job, my dream to visit every national park, and my deeply rooted fear of accidentally liking someone's Instagram post from 2013. After a few days of chatting, he asked if I wanted to meet up. "There's this great little bar downtown," he said. "Low-key good drinks, and they have trivia on Wednesdays. You in?" Normally, I'd be hesitant about meeting someone from an app so soon, but Aaron seemed different. Like a rom-com protagonist who had somehow wandered into my life. So I said yes. The bar was exactly as Aaron had described, low-key, with warm lighting and just enough noise to feel lively without being overwhelming. I spotted him as soon as I walked in, sitting at a table near the back. He looked even better in person, which is rare for dating apps. Usually it's the other way around. "Hey," he said, standing up to greet me. "You made it." "Yeah, I figured I'd give you a chance to impress me with your trivia skills," I said, smiling as I sat down. He laughed. "Oh, you're in trouble. I have an encyclopedic knowledge of useless facts." The first hour flew by. We ordered drinks, swapped embarrassing childhood stories, and teamed up for trivia. We crushed the movie round, thanks to his random knowledge of 80s slashers. He was funny, charming, and just the right amount of sarcastic. I started to think, maybe this could actually work. But then things got weird. It started small. Aaron asked me if I wanted another drink, and when I said yes, he got up to go to the bar. A few minutes later, the waitress came over with our drinks and said, "These are from the gentleman at the bar." I looked over, expecting to see Aaron, but he wasn't there. Instead, there was a man I didn't recognize, a tall, wiry guy with a creepy smile and eyes that felt like they were drilling holes into me. He raised his glass in a silent toast, and I felt my stomach drop. When Aaron came back to the table, I told him about the guy. "That's weird," he said, frowning. "Do you know him?" "No," I said, glancing over at the bar. The guy was gone. Aaron shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. We tried to get back into the flow of the conversation, but something felt off. He was quieter now, his easy charm replaced with a strange, almost distracted energy. He kept glancing at his phone, like he was waiting for a message. "You okay?" I finally asked. "Yes, sorry," he said, forcing a smile. "Just work stuff. My boss is a nightmare." I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. The vibe had shifted, and not in a good way. After another hour, Aaron offered to walk me to my car. "It's late," he said. "I want to make sure you get there safely." It was a sweet gesture, and despite the weirdness earlier, I still felt safer with him than walking alone. So I said yes. The parking lot was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that feels too quiet. As we walked, Aaron kept glancing over his shoulder, like he was expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. It was starting to freak me out. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Just stay close, okay?" That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind us. Slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. I turned around, and there he was. The creepy guy from the bar, standing about 20 feet away, his face partially hidden in the glow of a streetlight. "Hey," Aaron said, stepping in front of me. "What do you want?" The guy didn't answer. He just smiled, that same unsettling smile, and took a step closer. "Stay back," Aaron said, his voice firm. The guy tilted his head, like he was amused. "You really thought you could keep her from us?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. My blood ran cold. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered, grabbing Aaron's arm. Aaron didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife. "A knife?" "Emma, get behind me," he said, his eyes locked on the guy. What are you doing with that?" I stammered, backing away. "It's not what you think," Aaron said. "Just trust me." But how could I? I barely knew him, and now he was pulling a knife on a guy who was clearly unhinged. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. Before I could decide what to do, the creepy guy lunged at us. What happened next was a blur of chaos. Aaron moved faster than I thought possible, slashing at the guy with the knife. There was blood, too much blood, and a horrible, wet sound that I'll never forget. The guy crumpled to the ground, gasping and gurgling, and Aaron stood over him, breathing hard. "He's not dead," Aaron said quickly, turning to me. "We need to go. Now." "What the hell just happened?" I shouted, my voice shaking. "There's no time to explain," he said, grabbing my arm. "If he's here, the others aren't far behind." "The others?" Aaron didn't answer. He dragged me to my car, shoved me inside, and slammed the door. "Drive," he said, his voice urgent. "And don't stop until you're home." I didn't argue. I floored it out of the parking lot, my hands trembling on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, I saw Aaron standing there, watching me go. I never heard from him again. To this day, I don't know who or what that guy was, or why Aaron had a knife, or what he meant by the others. I wasn't really in the mood for a first date. It had been a long week at work, and honestly, the idea of making small talk with a stranger while pretending to be effortlessly charming felt as appealing as doing my taxes. But my best friend, Mia, had been pestering me for weeks. "You need to put yourself out there, Chloe," she'd said, practically shoving my phone into my hand. "You can't keep blaming your single status on bad timing. The timing is fine. You're just picky." She wasn't wrong. I am picky. But after Mia guilt-tripped me about dying alone and getting eaten by my future cats, I finally caved and re-downloaded the app. Again, that's how I met Adam. His profile wasn't anything flashy. He didn't have shirtless gym selfies or group photos where you have to guess which guy he was. Just a couple of nice pictures. One of him hiking, another of him laughing with a drink in hand. His bio was refreshingly normal too. "Work keeps me busy, so I love spending weekends outdoors. Big fan of tacos and documentaries. Let's swap bad jokes." He didn't seem like a serial killer, which is always a plus, so I swiped right. We matched immediately, and within hours we were chatting. He was funny, in that dry, sarcastic way that I like, and he didn't try to be overly flirty or weird. By the end of the conversation, he'd asked me out for drinks. I hesitated. Meeting someone from an app in real life always feels a little risky, no matter how nice they seem. But Adam had this calm, easygoing vibe, and besides, Mia had already threatened to change my Netflix password if I didn't make an effort. So I said yes. The bar Adam picked was nice. Classy, but not pretentious. The kind of place where you can order a cocktail without worrying it'll cost you your rent. I got there a few minutes early, partly because I didn't want to seem late, and partly because I like to scope out a place before I meet someone new. Call it a side effect of watching too many true crime shows. Adam arrived right on time, and I'll admit, he was better looking in person. Tall, broad shoulders, that slightly disheveled hair that somehow looks effortless instead of lazy. He smiled when he saw me, and immediately, I felt a little more at ease. "Chloe?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from me. "Wow, you're even prettier than your profile picture. You're not catfishing me, are you?" I laughed, grateful for the light-hearted icebreaker. If I am, I'm really committed to the bit. The first hour flew by. Adam was a great conversationalist, funny, thoughtful, and just sarcastic enough to keep things interesting. We talked about everything from our favorite movies to embarrassing childhood memories. He even made me laugh so hard I snorted, which is usually a deal breaker for me, but he didn't seem fazed. By the time we ordered a second round of drinks, I was starting to think, maybe this guy's actually different. But then things started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just little things I noticed, like how Adam kept glancing at his phone, even though he wasn't texting anyone, or the way he kept shifting in his seat, like he was uncomfortable. I told myself I was overthinking it. First dates are awkward sometimes. But then, halfway through my drink, he asked, "So, do you usually come here alone, or?" The question seemed innocent enough, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. I forced a smile. No, not really. My friends and I come here sometimes." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Cool. It's a good spot. Feels private." "Yeah, I guess," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. Inside, though, my alarm bells were starting to ring. The bar wasn't that private. It was small, sure, but there were plenty of people around. So why did he say it like that? I glanced at his phone, which he'd placed face down on the table. It buzzed once, lighting up briefly with a notification. He didn't check it, but I noticed the corner of his mouth twitch, like he was suppressing a smile. That's when I started to feel it. That creeping, gut-level dread. Something wasn't right. After we finished our drinks, Adam offered to walk me to my car. "It's late," he said, grinning. "Can't have you getting kidnapped or anything." The irony wasn't lost on me, but I laughed politely. "Thanks, but I'm good. It's just a short walk." Come on, he insisted. I'll feel better knowing you got there safely. I hesitated. Normally, I'd push back harder, but I didn't want to make a scene in the middle of the bar. So I nodded. Okay, sure. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I noticed how quiet the street was. Too quiet. Most of the shops were closed, and the only light came from the flickering neon sign above the bar. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, suddenly hyper-aware of how empty the area felt. Adam walked beside me, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. So, where's your car? He asked. Just around the corner, I lied. My car was actually parked a block away, but I didn't want to give him too much information. As we rounded the corner, I saw them. Two guys, standing by a black SUV parked near the end of the lot. They weren't talking, just standing there, leaning against the car like they were waiting for something, or someone. One of them looked up as we approached, and I felt his eyes linger on me a little too long. My heart started to race. Maybe they weren't connected to Adam. Maybe they were just random guys hanging out. But something about the way they were standing, so still, so deliberate, made my skin crawl. I slowed down, pretending to check my phone. Oh, actually, I said, my voice carefully casual. My friend just texted me. She needs me to pick her up. I should probably head out. Adam stopped walking and turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. Really? I thought you said your car was just around the corner. It is, I said quickly. But, she's not far. I'll just grab her and come back. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his blue eyes cold and unreadable. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Okay, he said slowly. If you're sure. I'm sure, I said, forcing a laugh. Thanks for tonight. It was fun. He took a step back, his hands still in his pockets. Yeah, it was. Drive safe, Chloe. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. As soon as I rounded the corner, I pulled out my phone and called Mia. Hey, she answered on the first ring. How's the date? Mia, I whispered, glancing over my shoulder to make sure Adam wasn't following me. Stay on the phone with me. Something's wrong. What? What's going on? Her voice was sharp now, all humor gone. I don't know, I said, my voice shaking. There were these guys in the parking lot. I think they were waiting for me. Chloe, where are you? Are you safe? I'm walking to my car now, I said. Just stay on the line, okay? I reached my car, unlocked the door, and practically threw myself inside. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Adam. He was standing at the edge of the lot, hands still in his pockets, watching me drive away. I didn't wait to find out what he was planning. I sped out of the lot and didn't stop driving until I was home, all the doors locked and all the lights on. Mia tried to convince me to report it, but what could I say? My date was nice, but there were some guys in the parking lot, and now I feel weird. No one would take that seriously. When I was stationed at Nellis AFB in Las Vegas, I had my fair share of odd experiences, but one in particular stands out as a contender for the worst date ever. Not just a bad date, but one of those epic disasters you tell people about for years, usually accompanied by disbelief, laughter, and the inevitable question, did that really happen? It all started with a coworker. Let's call him Tim. Tim wasn't particularly remarkable, nice enough on the surface, but nothing that screamed, this guy will be a great date. One day, out of the blue, he asked if I'd help him shop for furniture for his new place. He said he needed a woman's opinion to make sure his apartment didn't look like a bachelor's disaster zone. Seemed reasonable enough. Plus, he added, to thank you for taking the time, I'll buy you dinner. It didn't sound like a date so much as a favor between co-workers, and I figured, why not? Big mistake. The plan was simple. Meet at his place, hop in his car, go to the furniture store, and grab dinner afterward. I didn't expect anything glamorous. This was Tim, after all. But I also didn't expect it to devolve into an evening of unparalleled awkwardness. I showed up at his place at the agreed-upon time. His apartment was sparse. He wasn't kidding when he said he needed furniture. It was essentially a mattress on the floor, a couple of mismatched kitchen stools, and a pile of boxes. He greeted me with a grin, ushered me into his car, and we headed off to the furniture store. Here's where the fun began. At first, it seemed fine. We wandered through the aisles, and he asked for my opinion on various items. What do you think of this couch? He'd say, gesturing to a reasonably stylish option. It's nice, I'd reply. I like the color and the size. It would fit your space well. Tim would immediately launch into a detailed critique, pointing out every possible flaw. Nah, the legs look flimsy. The material feels cheap. It's way overpriced. He'd shake his head dismissively. You don't really think that's a good couch, do you? At first, I thought maybe he was just particular. But it kept happening. Every piece of furniture I suggested, every table, chair, lamp, or coffee table, was met with the same routine. He'd ask for my opinion, I'd give it, and he'd tell me why I was wrong. I started to feel like I was part of some weird furniture shopping interrogation. By the end of the 2-hour ordeal, I wasn't sure if he wanted help decorating his apartment or if he just enjoyed criticizing me. Eventually, we left the store empty-handed. Not a single purchase. Not even a throw pillow. As we got back into his car, I started to wonder if this dinner he'd promised me would be worth the trouble. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. On the way back to his place, he stopped at a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Not exactly the candlelit dinner I'd imagined, but I told myself to roll with it. Maybe he had a thing for fried chicken. I stayed in the car while he went inside, and when he returned, he was carrying a bucket of chicken. Just the chicken. No sides, no drinks, not even a biscuit. Dinner is served, he said with a grin. Back at his place, we sat at the kitchen counter. Well, I sat on one of the mismatched stools while he leaned against the counter. There was no table, no plates, and no napkins. Just the two of us eating greasy chicken straight out of the bucket. I felt like I'd stumbled into a low-budget sitcom. Still, I tried to stay polite. It wasn't exactly the evening I'd envisioned, but maybe it would make for a funny story later. As I gnawed on a drumstick, I noticed Tim watching me with an odd expression. It wasn't long before he made his move. Well, he said, brushing his hands on his pants, I guess it's time for bed. I stared at him, unsure if I'd heard correctly. What? Bed, he repeated matter-of-factly. You know, sleeping arrangements. We can use the mattress on the floor. I blinked, trying to process what was happening. Was he serious? Did he really think this greasy chicken picnic was going to lead to that? I think I'll pass, I said, setting the drumstick back in the bucket and grabbing my purse. Thanks for dinner, though. His face fell. Wait, you're leaving? Yes, I said firmly. I think I've had enough for one night. Tim looked genuinely insulted, as though I'd just rejected a 5-star meal and a stay at the Ritz. But I thought we had a connection. A connection? I repeated, incredulous. Tim, you spent 2 hours telling me why all my furniture suggestions were wrong, bought a bucket of chicken for dinner, and then suggested we share a mattress on the floor. What part of this evening felt like a connection? He sputtered something about misunderstanding and how I wasn't giving him a chance, but I was already halfway to the door. I didn't even bother with a polite goodbye. The worst part? I had to see him at work every day for the next 5 years. Every time I passed him in the hallway or sat across from him in a meeting, I was reminded of that awkward evening. He never brought it up, and neither did I, but the memory of that bucket of chicken haunted me every time I smelled fried food. Looking back, I can laugh about it. At the time, it was infuriating, but now it's one of those stories you tell your friends when they complain about a bad date. Oh, you think that was bad? Let me tell you about Tim and the bucket of chicken. The whole experience taught me a few things. First, never agree to a date that involves shopping for furniture unless you're absolutely sure the other person isn't secretly using it as a test of your patience. Second, always have an exit strategy. And third, some people just have no idea what a proper date looks like. To this day, I don't know what Tim was thinking. Maybe he really thought he was being charming. Maybe he genuinely believed KFC and a mattress on the floor were the keys to romance. Or maybe he was just clueless. Whatever the case, I learned my lesson. So here's to Tim, the man who turned furniture shopping and fried chicken into one of the most hilariously awkward evenings of my life. May he one day figure out why that date didn't end the way he'd hoped. I have sex with men to steal their power. I felt sick to my stomach. At first she seemed like a normal, although quirky, but I'm quirky too, fellow college student. I was going to a small liberal arts college studded with orange trees in beautiful Southern California. I had been semi-involved with her before, after she came up to me sophomore year and said, "I like your energy, let's be friends." But when I didn't go farther than making out, she lost interest. Then I got elected to a student government position, and for the first time in months she was in my room, saying, "You were so inspiring, it was very sexy." Oh, thanks. I never thought of myself as sexy. I was always more of a theater geek and bookworm. But I guess I had grown up a bit since my awkward, 100 pounds high school days. Why not just have sex? It's no big deal, right? I mean, see if it feels good. I couldn't say no to that. I mean, I could have, but how do you say no to that? She was cute. I liked her. So we did. It was okay. Maybe normal at first. But after having sex for a while, maybe I didn't come soon enough, she straddled me, began thrusting hard, and started screaming. Finish, finish, finish. It was disorienting. But I was new to sex, so I thought, maybe this is the way it is? But it just didn't sit well with me. Just felt like something that I thought was innocent or intimate just took a weird turn. But then maybe I was just a prude. I didn't know how to say no to her, so when she would come over we would have sex, but I never came with her again. Not until my friend invited me to a sexual harassment seminar. So I went. And the professor, she was very captivating, very powerful speaker. She basically said, if you're having sex with someone and you don't feel comfortable about it, that's rape. I was like, whoa, because I didn't know it was okay to say no to someone you'd willingly had sex with. But it was really weirding me out that I would get back to my dorm room from class, and there she'd be, sitting at my desk in my room reading my journals. I know, I'm a guy and I write in a journal. Whatever, I've been writing my dreams and thoughts down since I was a kid. And it just didn't feel right. But she would pass it off like, we're having sex, you're not allowed to have any boundaries from me. So it was one of those days where I come home and she's there looking through my stuff. I'm fascinated by you. I just want to know all about your life. And she saw one of my books on Hermeticism, and she was just like, oh, are you studying this? I'm practicing a sect of Gnosticism, where I have sex with men to steal their power. What? Yeah, there's a lot of energy in semen. Is that why you're not finishing when you're with me? I lead her out of my room, but now I had gone to the sexual harassment seminar. I knew it was okay to say no to someone if you didn't feel comfortable having sex with them. But she wasn't having it. Why not? It feels good, doesn't it? I feel good, don't I? Well, physically yes, but I just don't feel safe with you. But at least we can just have sex. No, I don't want to have sex with you anymore. But why not if it feels good? It went back and forth like that for a while. She just didn't seem to get it. She kept pushing, and I really thought I must be being crazy because here was a cute girl that wanted to have sex with me. That was challenging me about not having sex with her again. Because I feel like you raped me. I don't know why I said that. Maybe because of the workshop, maybe because none of my other reasons or my feelings seemed to matter at all. It was like talking to a wall. Can we at least be friends? No, I don't feel safe with you. About 6 weeks later, I woke up having sex with her, and finishing, which I had never done with her since the first time she was screaming at me to come. What? Do you love me underscore 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 underscore? What? No. It's hard to jump into a conversation while the night and the world is swirling around you, and what might have been a bad dream is suddenly resolving itself into the real, and you're looking down on yourself that should have been sleeping alone, but is instead in bed with someone you thought you would never have to interact with again, and you're having some kind of zombie sex. But what if I was pregnant with your child? That's scary. I kicked her out of my room. I got pissed at my roommate for letting her in while I was asleep, but he didn't know any better. Anytime a girl wants to have sex with, you're a guy, right? That's a good thing. She kept coming to my room telling me she had something to show me. I kept just closing the door. It was like I wasn't allowed to have any boundaries. Like nothing I said mattered, but what she wanted. But at the very least, as long as I was awake, I could tell her to get the fuck away from me. Fine, have it your way. A few weeks later, everyone in our very small school was looking at me funny. The halls of my building were plastered with "No means no" posters. A kid I knew from one of my classes came up to me fuming. Rapist. What? I quickly found out that's what she had been trying to show me all those weeks. She had put a piece in the school paper saying that she had said no, that she had been raped. My friend, a feminist that I really trusted and believed was a good sounding board, told me that women were constantly being violated, that maybe I just didn't understand, but that I needed to talk to her and make things right. Not one person asked me what I experienced. Once the accusation was out, I was evil number one, unworthy of listening to, and I had nothing to say. Her whole thing, it was just so gross and disgusting. I didn't feel like sharing any of it. I just didn't have the energy to have to share something that most people were completely unwilling to even consider because, hey, this is a liberal arts college. The white male-dominant patriarchy is bad, and women are victims, and anything that happens, it's your fault, because you must have been horny and lost control of yourself. The school was unwilling to do anything. I asked them about judicial council. They literally told me that no matter what the chances were almost nil they would ever side with a male student because of the climate on campus. Anyhow, I finally asked her why she did it, why she created this whole shame campaign against me. I wanted to feel powerful. She said, "That is the creepiest thing anyone has ever done to me." P.S. Years later, at a reunion, her friends teased me about how they had gotten away with slander and sexual assault on me. They were proud of themselves. It was part of their empowerment. There are bad dates, there are awkward dates, and then there are dates that leave you questioning your life choices, your sanity, and possibly your safety. This was one of those. It all started innocently enough. I met her online, a goth girl with a striking profile. She had this mysterious, almost ethereal vibe that I couldn't resist. Her photos had an artistic, darkly romantic quality to them, and her messages were witty and intriguing. We'd exchanged a lot of back and forths, and I thought, why not? She seemed cool, interesting, and different. A little different can be exciting, right? So, we arranged to meet in person. The date itself was surprisingly normal. She was gorgeous, with striking dark eyeliner, a black velvet dress, and an energy that was both alluring and a little intimidating. We talked about music, literature, and her love for the macabre. Think Edgar Allan Poe and old horror films. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, though she did have a knack for bringing up topics like death and decay with an ease that most people reserve for discussing the weather. After dinner, she suggested we head back to her place. I hesitated for a moment. She lived in the countryside, and the thought of navigating dark, unfamiliar roads wasn't exactly appealing. But I didn't want to seem rude or uninterested, and honestly I was intrigued. I agreed, and we drove out to her house. It was a tiny, isolated cottage in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place you see in horror movies where the characters absolutely should not go. As we pulled up, the night seemed unnaturally quiet. No distant hum of traffic, no chirping crickets, just an eerie silence. The cottage itself was quaint but unsettling, with ivy creeping up the walls and a dim yellow light glowing from the windows. The moment I stepped inside, I felt off. The air was thick with the scent of candles and something vaguely metallic, like old coins or blood. My eyes immediately landed on something on the sideboard, a human skull. A real, actual skull. It wasn't hidden away or subtly placed. It was displayed prominently, as if it were a decorative centerpiece. I couldn't stop myself from pointing at it. Is that real? I asked, half hoping she'd laugh and say it was a Halloween decoration or some elaborate replica. Oh, you mean Felix? She replied nonchalantly. Yeah, he's real. Felix. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. She went on to explain, in the same tone someone might use to describe finding a stray cat, that she'd discovered Felix while digging in her garden. He was part of 2 skeletons she'd unearthed. 2 skeletons. She said she'd reported the bodies to the police. Good start, but then casually mentioned that she decided to keep one of the skulls. Just decided to keep it. I didn't even know how to respond. I nodded dumbly, as if keeping one of the skulls was a perfectly normal, everyday decision. My mind raced with questions. Was this legal? Who were the skeletons? Why was Felix just sitting there on a sideboard instead of being studied by forensic experts or buried properly? Before I could voice any of this, she changed the subject. Come on, I'll show you the rest of the house, she said, taking my hand and leading me deeper into what I was starting to think of as the House of Horrors. Her bedroom was next. At first glance, it seemed normal enough. Lots of black fabrics, heavy curtains, and shelves lined with books and trinkets. But as I looked closer, I realized those shelves held more than just books. On display were jars. Dozens of jars, each containing something pickled. I moved closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. One jar held what looked like a baby rabbit, perfectly preserved in murky liquid. Another contained a lizard, its small body suspended like some bizarre science experiment. Then there were the organs. One jar held something that looked suspiciously like a brain. Another held, I don't even know what, something pink and fleshy, twisted in a way that made my stomach churn. Wow, you've got quite the collection, I said, my voice shaky as I tried to keep it together. She beamed, clearly proud. Yeah, I like to preserve things, she said, as though she were talking about scrapbooking or collecting stamps. There's something so beautiful about decay, don't you think? Beautiful. About decay. I nodded slowly, my fight-or-flight instincts kicking in. By now, I wasn't just uncomfortable. I was genuinely on edge. My mind kept going back to Felix. If she was comfortable keeping a human skull and preserving dead animals in jars, what else was she capable of? I scanned the room, half expecting to see a cauldron bubbling in the corner or a trapdoor leading to a basement full of skeletons. To her credit, she was still gorgeous, still charming in her own haunting way. But the allure was quickly fading under the weight of all the red flags. As much as I hate to admit it, sex was the last thing on my mind. I wasn't thinking about romance or chemistry anymore. I was thinking about escape routes. I mumbled something about having an early morning, feigning a yawn for good measure. I should probably get going, I said, edging toward the door. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. Okay, she said softly, walking me back to the front door. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. But it wasn't until I was back in my car, speeding down the dark country roads toward the city, that I truly exhaled. The further I got from her house, the safer I felt. By the time I reached the motorway, my heart rate was finally slowing down. I replayed the evening in my head, still trying to make sense of it. The skull, the jars, the casual way she'd talked about finding skeletons in her garden, as if they were weeds. It was equal parts fascinating and terrifying. Looking back, it's almost funny. Almost. I mean, how many people can say they went on a date with someone who casually kept a human skull named Felix? Or who had a bedroom full of preserved animals and organs? It's the kind of story you tell at parties, and no one believes you until you swear it's true. She was beautiful, no doubt about it. But beauty only goes so far when you're sitting in someone's house wondering if you'll end up as part of their collection. To this day, I don't remember the excuse I used to get out of there, but I do remember the overwhelming sense of relief as I drove away. Maybe she was harmless. Maybe it was all just a quirky, goth aesthetic taken to the extreme. But I wasn't about to stick around and find out. Some dates end in romance. Some dates end in disaster. And then there are dates like this, dates that leave you questioning everything, from your taste in women to your survival instincts. And no, I never saw her again. In January 2022, I decided to dip my toes back into the world of online dating. It wasn't an easy decision. I was nervous, hesitant, and honestly a little skeptical about whether I'd find anything worthwhile. Still, I decided to give it a try, figuring I had nothing to lose. That's how I ended up on ourtime.com, a dating site geared toward people like me, older, wiser, and maybe a little bruised from love but still hopeful. It didn't take long before I connected with a man who seemed almost too good to be true. He lived in Flagstaff, Arizona, just 80 miles away from me, a town I visited regularly. He was charming, attentive, and full of compliments. "You're beautiful," he'd say. "I can't stop looking at your smile." Flattery is an easy way to catch someone's attention, and it worked on me. The conversation started out lighthearted and fun. He'd tell me about his travels for work, his love for the outdoors, and the life he'd built for himself. Within a week, we were talking for hours every day. 4 or 5 hours would slip by as we shared stories, dreams, and even personal struggles. It felt nice to have someone so invested in getting to know me. After years of feeling unseen, I felt special again. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered. That kind of connection, whether real or manufactured, can be intoxicating. When he mentioned marriage during our 4th week of talking, I was taken aback. I remember laughing nervously and asking, "Don't you think it's a little soon for that?" But he was insistent. "When you know," he said. "I've never felt this way about anyone before." It was flattering, sure, but it also raised a red flag. We hadn't even met in person yet. I'd offered to drive to Flagstaff more than once, but every time, he was conveniently away on business. Still, I pushed my doubts aside. He had an explanation for everything, and when I'd Google the details he gave me, they always checked out, or at least came close enough to feel plausible. For a while, I let myself believe in the fantasy. I thought, maybe this is what real love feels like, sweeping, all-consuming, and a little chaotic. But deep down, I knew something didn't feel right. Then one morning, I woke up to an email from him. It wasn't his usual sweet message wishing me good morning. This one was different. He was asking me for $8,000. My heart sank. The story he gave me was elaborate. He was overseas for work, and something had gone wrong. An emergency he couldn't get out of without my help. He was desperate, sick, and pleading with me to save him so he could come home to me. At first, I thought it might be a misunderstanding. Surely he wasn't serious. But he was. I told him no. Immediately, firmly. "I can't help you," I said, feeling a pang of guilt even though I knew I was doing the right thing. He didn't take it well. He cried, telling me how much he was suffering and how I was his only hope. "If you loved me, you'd help me," he said. Those words stung, even though I knew they were manipulative. He piled on the guilt, reminding me of all the hours we'd spent talking, the connection we'd built, the promises we'd made to each other. He painted a picture of himself as a broken man, just trying to get back to the woman he loved. For a moment, I almost caved. Almost. But something inside me snapped. I realized I didn't really know this man. I'd never met him in person. All I had were words on a screen and a voice on the phone. The idea of sending him that kind of money suddenly felt absurd. We went back and forth for a few more weeks, him pleading and me standing my ground. Eventually I ended it. I blocked his number, his email, and any other way he could contact me. It hurt, but it was also a relief. The fantasy he'd spun was just that, a fantasy, and I wasn't going to let myself be part of it anymore. After that, I swore off online dating. I told myself it wasn't worth the risk, that I'd rather be alone than go through something like that again. But deep down, I still wanted what he'd pretended to offer: real love, connection, and companionship. About a year later, I decided to give it one more shot. I signed up for another dating app, this time with more caution and less blind hope. That's when I met Norm. Norm was different from the start. He wasn't flashy or overly complimentary. He was steady, kind, and warm. Our conversations felt natural, like catching up with an old friend. I was hesitant at first, still shaken by my experience with the scammer, but Norm was patient. He didn't rush me or push me into anything. We took things slow, and I appreciated that. I still remember the first time we talked on the phone. His voice was calm and reassuring, and he said something that stuck with me. "I feel like I've known you forever." It was such a simple thing to say, but it felt genuine. A few months later, we decided to meet in person. Norm lived in another state, so I flew up to spend Thanksgiving with him and his family. That weekend, he proposed. It felt sudden, but it also felt right. Unlike the previous year's whirlwind fantasy, this was grounded in reality. I'd met his family, shared meals with them, and seen firsthand the kind of man he was. I flew back home after Thanksgiving, but a few weeks later, I returned to spend Christmas with him, his adult children, and his grandchildren. By the time the holidays were over, it was clear to both of us that we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. We were married a few months later in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by the people who mattered most. Looking back, my experience with the scammer taught me some valuable lessons. It reminded me to trust my instincts, to question things that don't feel right, and to protect my heart as fiercely as I protect my bank account. It was a painful experience, but it also made me appreciate what I found with Norm even more. Sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or whirlwind romances. Sometimes it's about quiet moments, shared laughter, and the kind of connection that feels effortless. And in the end, it's worth the wait. Lucas stood out. His pictures showed him hiking, working with plants in what looked like a personal greenhouse, and smiling warmly in a way that felt genuine. His bio said, "Plant Dad, amateur chef, lover of thunderstorms and late-night conversations. Let's trade gardening tips or ghost stories." It was different, refreshing. Most guys just write 6 feet 0 inches because apparently that matters, or some half-hearted joke about tacos. Lucas seemed like someone who actually put thought into his profile. That, or he was really good at faking it. Either way, I was intrigued. We matched, and he messaged me first. "Are you more of a succulent person, or do you have a garden that would put mine to shame?" It was quirky, specific, and not the usual hey opener. We started talking, and I found myself enjoying the conversation more than I had with anyone else on the app. He told me about his love of gardening, how he found it calming to work with his hands and watch things grow. He said he had a greenhouse out behind his house that he'd built himself, where he grew herbs, vegetables, and even a few exotic plants. I told him about the sad little basil plant I was trying to keep alive on my kitchen windowsill, and he promised to give me tips to help it thrive. After a week of chatting, he asked if I'd like to meet in person. "I know this great coffee shop," he wrote. "Quiet, cozy, and they have the best chai lattes in town. No pressure, of course, but I'd love to meet you." I hesitated for a moment. Meeting someone from an app is always a gamble, no matter how nice they seem. But Lucas had been nothing but kind and respectful so far, and there was something about him that made me feel safe. I said yes. The coffee shop was exactly as Lucas had described, quiet, cozy, and full of warm lighting that made even the rain-soaked street outside feel inviting. I got there a little early, as I always do, and grabbed a seat by the window. When Lucas walked in, I recognized him immediately. He looked just like his pictures, tall, lean, with shaggy brown hair and a soft smile that seemed to put everyone around him at ease. "Hey, you must be Lily," he said, his voice warm and friendly as he sat down across from me. It's great to finally meet you. You too, I said, smiling. The first hour flew by. Lucas was just as charming in person as he'd been over text. He told me about the greenhouse he'd built, how he was experimenting with growing tropical fruits, and how he'd recently started making his own herbal teas. He even gave me a few tips for keeping my basil plant alive, which I promptly wrote down. It was easy, comfortable. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd met someone who was genuinely good. But then, toward the end of the date, he said something that threw me off. You should come by sometime, he said, stirring the last of his latte. See the greenhouse. I think you'd love it. It sounded innocent enough, but something about the way he said it made me pause. I laughed nervously. Maybe, I said. I don't want to impose. You wouldn't be, he said quickly, his smile widening. I love showing it off. And it's peaceful. You'd see what I mean if you came by. I nodded, but I didn't commit to anything. It was too soon. Too fast. Over the next few days, Lucas kept texting me, and things seemed normal again. He asked how my basil plant was doing, sent me pictures of his greenhouse, and even shared a recipe for homemade pesto. He was sweet, thoughtful, and attentive without being overbearing. But then, one night, he sent me a picture that made my stomach twist. It was of a small potted plant, the kind you'd find in any garden center. But what caught my attention was the tag sticking out of the soil. It had my name written on it. For your basil, the caption read. I stared at the photo, my heart beating faster. It was thoughtful, sure, but how did he know my name well enough to label a plant like that? And why was he tagging it like it was waiting for me? I didn't respond right away. Something about it felt too personal, too soon. And then a few nights later, I got another message from him. Hey, I dropped something off for you. Let me know what you think. My stomach sank, and I immediately went to the door. Sitting on my welcome mat was a small potted basil plant, identical to the one in the photo. How did he know where I lived? I called Mia immediately, my voice shaking as I told her what had happened. Block his number, she said firmly. And call the cops if he shows up again. That's not romantic, it's creepy. I blocked him that night. A few days later, I thought it was over. I hadn't heard from Lucas, and the basil plant was sitting outside on the balcony untouched. But then, one evening as I was coming home from work, I noticed something strange. There was a car parked across the street from my building. A black sedan, unmarked but clean, with tinted windows. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except for the fact that it had been there the night before, too. And the night before that. I tried to shake it off as a coincidence, but when I got to my door, I saw it. Another plant. This time, it was a small, flowering vine with bright green leaves and delicate white blossoms. The tag sticking out of the soil read, for Lily. Come see the greenhouse. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went to the police. They took my statement, but without any direct threats, there wasn't much they could do. I changed my locks, started parking my car in a different lot, and made sure to always check my surroundings when I left the apartment. But the plants kept coming. Every few days, another one would show up on my doorstep. A fern, an orchid, a small palm tree, each one more elaborate than the last, each one with a tag that said, come see the greenhouse. I stopped going out at night. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. And then one night I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on my bedroom window. I live on the second floor. When I looked outside, there was no one there. Just a single, small potted plant sitting on the windowsill. The tag read, I'll bring the greenhouse to you. It all started with a match on Tinder. He seemed decent, attractive, friendly, and someone who shared a similar work ethic, which was a refreshing change. We hit it off quickly over messages, swapping stories about our jobs and ambitions. After a few days of chatting, he asked if I wanted to go to the lake with him. A day at the lake? I thought. That sounded perfect. I pictured a cozy, scenic picnic, maybe with a couple of drinks, some good conversation, and a chance to enjoy nature. It felt casual yet thoughtful, the kind of date where you could relax but still get to know each other better. I eagerly said yes. The plan was to meet at a grocery store to pick up some drinks before heading to the lake. When I got there, he greeted me warmly, and everything seemed fine. At first, we browsed the store, chatting as we made our selections. I opted for a cute bottle of wine, something light and sweet that seemed fitting for a lakeside picnic. Then I glanced at his choice, a handle of Jim Beam. Red flag number 1. I hesitated for a moment, but decided not to overthink it. Maybe he liked bourbon, and maybe he wasn't planning to drink much. Still, a giant handle of whiskey for a casual outing felt excessive. We got to the checkout line, and that's when red flag number 2 reared its head. His card was declined. He didn't seem particularly embarrassed, though, just mildly annoyed. "Try it again," he told the cashier, not asked, but told, in a way that felt a little off. When it failed again, he pulled out a second card and tried that. It worked, and we walked out with our drinks, but the whole interaction left a sour taste in my mouth. It wasn't the declined card that bothered me as much as his attitude. As we exited the store, I told him what my car looked like so we could head to the lake. That's when he said, almost casually, "I'm the truck with the boat." The truck with the boat? My stomach dropped. There had been no mention of a boat in our plans. I'm not someone who enjoys being out of control, and the thought of getting on a boat with a guy I'd just met, on a first date no less, immediately made me anxious. When we got to the lake, and I saw the speedboat hitched to the back of his truck, I tried to stay calm. I asked, trying to keep my tone light, "Oh, I didn't know you were bringing your boat." He shrugged, looking unbothered. "Yeah, I didn't know either, until today." Red flag number 3. At that point, I was on high alert. Everything about this felt reckless. He hadn't planned this out, he hadn't communicated with me, and now he was expecting me to climb into a speedboat on a lake where cell service was spotty at best, with someone I barely knew. I told him, as politely as I could, that boats made me nervous and I didn't feel comfortable going out on the water. Instead of listening or trying to reassure me, he brushed off my concerns, acting like I was overreacting. "We'll just drive around a bit, then," he said dismissively, as if I were a child afraid of the dark. So we drove around the lake in silence. The scenic charm I'd imagined was completely overshadowed by my growing discomfort. I felt trapped in this awkward situation, unable to relax or enjoy myself. He didn't make much effort to talk or connect, and the tension between us hung heavy in the air. After what felt like an eternity, he suggested grabbing dinner. I agreed, mostly because I wanted the date to have a definitive endpoint. We stopped at a Mexican restaurant 30 minutes before it closed. The rushed meal was a fitting conclusion to the awkward day. We barely spoke as we ate, and when it was over, he handed me my bottle of wine like it was some kind of consolation prize. I drove home that night knowing I'd never see him again. Needless to say, it was one of the most uncomfortable dates I've ever been on. The lack of communication, the red flags, the way he dismissed my feelings, it was all just too much. I never reached out to him again, and thankfully, he didn't try to contact me either. The whole experience left me questioning whether Tinder, or online dating in general, was even worth the hassle. But as it turns out, sometimes you just have to wade through a few bad dates to find the good ones. A few months after that fiasco, I matched with someone else on Tinder, a woman this time. We connected immediately, but in a completely different way. There were no grandiose plans or impulsive suggestions. Instead, we bonded over our shared sense of humor, our love for the same TV shows, and the easy flow of conversation. She was kind, thoughtful, and patient in a way that felt refreshing after my previous experiences. At first, we were just friends. I was still healing from a difficult breakup, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for something serious. She seemed to understand that, giving me the space I needed, while still showing genuine interest in getting to know me. There were moments when I thought our conversations might fizzle out. She even admitted later that she thought we had dry conversations at first, but something kept pulling us back to each other. 2 months after we first matched, we reconnected. This time it felt different. I was ready to open up, and she was willing to meet me where I was. Slowly but surely, my walls came down. I let myself be vulnerable, and as I did, I found myself falling for her. Our relationship grew naturally and steadily. There were no rushed plans, no red flags, just a deepening connection built on trust and mutual respect. When she pursued me, even when I was still figuring out what I wanted, it showed me how serious she was about us. And when I finally allowed myself to take a risk with her, it paid off in ways I couldn't have imagined. 2 years later, we got engaged. She proposed on a quiet evening, just the two of us, and it was perfect. Now, as we plan our wedding, I often think back to the journey that brought us here. The bad dates, the awkward moments, the doubts and hesitations, they all led me to her. Online dating is a roller coaster, no doubt about it. But sometimes, when you're willing to take a chance, you find exactly what you're looking for. I may have started my Tinder experience with a red flag-filled disaster, but I ended it with the love of my life. And we're very happy. After a few days of swiping through profiles that ranged from, "I'm here for a good time," "not a long time," to "let's smash the patriarchy together," I matched with Ben. Ben was cute in a scruffy, boy-next-door kind of way, floppy brown hair, glasses, and a big goofy grin in nearly every photo. His bio said, "Lover of bad movies, good pizza, and board games I'll definitely beat you at." It was basic, but honestly, I wasn't looking for Shakespeare. I just wanted a guy who could make me laugh and wouldn't ghost me after 3 messages. Ben messaged me first, which is always a good sign. The opener? "If you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? And why is it tacos?" It was cheesy, but in a self-aware way, and I appreciated that. We started chatting, and before long, we were bantering like we'd known each other for years. He seemed funny, down to earth, and totally normal. Naturally, I ignored every red flag my true crime podcast addiction had taught me and agreed to meet him for dinner. The restaurant he picked was a trendy burger place downtown, the kind of spot where everything on the menu has some ironic name like The Big Dill or Beat It. I got there first, which was my plan. I like to scope out a place before the date arrives. You know, in case I need to make a quick exit or text Tasha my emergency escape code. I left my curling iron on. Ben showed up 5 minutes later, and I immediately recognized him from his photos. He was tall, lanky, and wearing a leather jacket that looked a little too big on him, but somehow worked. He smiled when he saw me, and I found myself relaxing a bit. "Hey, nice to finally meet you," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "You too," I said. "I was worried you'd be a 50-year-old man using your nephew's photos." "Give me some credit," he joked. "I'm only 45. We laughed, and the tension melted away. So far, so good. The first part of the date was great. We talked about everything: our favorite movies, weird childhood stories, the time he accidentally set off the fire alarm in his college dorm because he tried to microwave a Pop-Tart. He was charming in that awkward, self-deprecating way that made me feel like I could let my guard down. Then about halfway through dinner, I noticed something odd. Ben kept shifting in his seat, like he was uncomfortable. At first, I thought maybe he just needed to adjust, but then he started twitching, like full-on, jerky little movements that he was clearly trying to hide. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned. Yeah, he said quickly, waving it off. "Just, my jacket. It's kind of tight. Leather, you know. It's not super breathable." I nodded, though something about his explanation didn't sit right. The jacket didn't look tight. In fact, it looked a little loose on him, like it might be second-hand or borrowed. But I didn't want to press. Maybe he was just nervous. A few minutes later, as we were splitting an order of fries, it happened. Ben reached for a fry, and as he leaned forward, the sleeve of his jacket shifted just enough for me to catch a glimpse of something strange. At first, I thought it was a tattoo, something dark and textured on his forearm. But then I realized it wasn't ink. It was fur. "Oh, what's that?" I asked, pointing to his arm. Ben froze, his face turning bright red. "Oh, that's, He trailed off, looking like he wanted to crawl under the table. "Ben," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm, "are you wearing fur under your jacket?" He let out a nervous laugh and ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, so funny story." I braced myself. "There's nothing good that starts with funny story." "This isn't my jacket," he admitted. "I borrowed it from my roommate. And I didn't realize until I got here that it's lined with rabbit fur." "Like real rabbit fur?" I blinked at him, not sure whether to laugh or scream. Why wouldn't you just take it off?" He grimaced. "Because I'm not wearing a shirt underneath." I stared at him, trying to process what I'd just heard. "You came to a first date shirtless?" "It wasn't intentional," he said, looking genuinely mortified. "I was running late, and I thought, oh, I'll just throw on the jacket and go. I didn't think I'd have to explain this." I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-on, tears streaming down my face laugh. The absurdity of the situation was too much. Ben, to his credit, started laughing too, though his was more of a "I want the ground to swallow me whole" kind of laugh. The rest of the date was a blur of awkward hilarity. Every time he moved, the fur lining peeked out, and I had to fight the urge to make a werewolf in leather joke. By the time the check came, we were both red-faced and giggling like idiots. As we stepped outside, Ben turned to me, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "So, I guess I kind of ruined the whole cool leather jacket vibe, huh? You think?" I teased, grinning. "But hey, at least you'll never forget this date." "Trust me," he said, smiling sheepishly. "I'm never borrowing anything from my roommate again." We didn't end up going on a second date, but not because of the jacket incident. Ben was sweet, but there wasn't really a spark between us. Still, I'll never forget him, or the image of him sitting there in a fur-lined leather jacket, trying to act like he wasn't halfway to transforming into a woodland creature. Dating is weird, but at least it's never boring. This happened about 5 years ago, and I've only started talking about it recently, because it's one of those things that's so surreal, you kind of gaslight yourself into believing it didn't actually happen. Spoiler, it did. So, rewind to 2018. I was living in Seattle at the time, working at a coffee shop, and going through a particularly rough breakup. My best friend, Sarah, convinced me that the best way to move on was to get back out there and start dating again. And by dating, I mean she downloaded Tinder on my phone, set up my profile for me, and started swiping on dudes while I sat there eating ice cream and questioning all my life choices. A couple of days later, I matched with this guy named Evan. He was cute, dark hair, kind of scruffy, had this artsy vibe about him. His bio said something like, lover of books, long walks, and good conversation, which, yeah, sounds generic, but it was better than the 800 profiles that just said 6 feet 3 inches, because apparently that matters. We started chatting, and he was really charming. Like, he had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the world. He asked thoughtful questions, made jokes that were actually funny, and even recommended a book he thought I'd like. It was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, and looking back, yeah, maybe that should have been a clue. After about a week of texting, he asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee. Normally, I'd be a little hesitant about meeting someone from an app so soon, but he seemed so normal and sweet that I figured, why not? Plus, we were meeting in public, so I wasn't too worried. We met at this little indie coffee shop in Capitol Hill. I got there first and grabbed a table by the window, and when Evan walked in, I immediately recognized him. He looked just like his pictures, tall, lean, with this kind of quiet confidence about him. He smiled when he saw me, and I remember thinking, wow, this guy's even better in person. The date started off great. He was easy to talk to, funny, and had this calm, almost soothing presence. We talked about books, movies, and random Seattle stuff like the best places to get pho at 2 a.m. At one point, he asked if I wanted to go for a walk, and since it was a nice day, I said sure. We ended up walking to Volunteer Park, which, for those of you who don't know, is this big park with trails, a conservatory, and a water tower you can climb for a view of the city. It was honestly really nice. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and I remember thinking, this could actually go somewhere. But then things got weird. It started with little things. Like, as we were walking, he kept steering the conversation toward darker topics. He asked if I believed in the death penalty, if I thought people were born evil, and what I thought about forgiveness. At first, I thought he was just trying to be deep or philosophical, but the way he talked about it was unsettling. At one point, he asked, "Do you think some people deserve to die?" I kind of laughed nervously and said, I guess it depends on what they've done. He nodded, looking thoughtful. It's interesting, isn't it? The idea of justice. Like, who gets to decide what's fair? I didn't know what to say, so I just kind of shrugged and changed the subject. When we got to the water tower, he suggested we climb to the top. I was a little hesitant. It's not super busy up there, and the whole "do you think people deserve to die" conversation was still fresh in my mind. But I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I agreed. When we got to the top, the view was incredible. You could see the whole city, the mountains, everything. For a minute, I forgot about how weird the conversation had been. But then, Evan leaned against the railing and said something that made my stomach drop. This would be a good place to disappear someone. I froze. What? He smiled like he'd just told a joke. I'm kidding. Like in those crime shows. Someone gets pushed off a building, and no one even knows who did it. I laughed nervously, but I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I decided right then and there that I needed to end the date. We climbed back down, and as soon as we got to the bottom, I faked a text from Sarah saying she needed me to help her with something. Evan didn't seem bothered. He just smiled and said, "No problem. Let me know if you want to hang out again." I nodded, trying to seem casual, and practically speed-walked back to my car. Here's where things get really messed up. A few months later, I was scrolling through the news when I saw a headline that made my blood run cold. Suspected serial killer Evan J. arrested in connection with multiple murders. I clicked on the article, and there he was. Evan, the guy I'd gone on a date with. According to the police, he'd been luring women through dating apps, meeting them for coffee or dinner, and then convincing them to go somewhere more secluded. His victims were found in parks, forests, and hiking trails around the Seattle area. The worst part? Volunteer Park was one of his hunting grounds. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling like I was going to throw up. It was like my brain couldn't process it. The sweet, funny guy I'd gone on a date with was a literal serial killer. I called Sarah right away and told her everything. She made me promise to report it to the police, just in case they needed more information. I did, but honestly, I still get chills thinking about how close I came to being one of his victims. So yeah, to fool by going on a date with a serial killer. Moral of the story? Always trust your gut. And maybe don't agree to climb a water tower with a guy who asks if people deserve to die.